I'm Shalonda Kelly, and I just wanted to talk with you and share today my experiences in obtaining tenure. Despite structural issues and adverse racial perspectives. And you've heard quite a bit already in terms of the obstacles for faculty of color, such as being more highly represented in assistant professor positions and untenured positions. And even within psychology, this is the case. So for example, American Psychological Association's survey found that 76% of men versus 51% of women were tenured. They also found that 71% of whites versus 42% of minorities were tenured. And I imagine that not many African Americans were in that low percentage as well. And I wanted to share, like, my passion, the thing that I came into academia to make my mark about is both in terms of racial perspectives, how we think about ourselves as Black people, and also couple relationships. So I love to put those things together to study Black couples. So that's been my passion, my enduring passion while I've been at Rutgers. And there's theory that states that, as you all know, we've all talked about this whole thing about stigma, that how do we deal in this environment where people do not necessarily respect our work and us as human beings. And theory states that we are affected negatively by it to the extent that we internalize those images of ourselves. And my work has found, in particular, that the extent to which African Americans endorse anti-white perspectives, which might be negative stereotypes about Blacks, and negative racial identities and things like that, the extent to which we endorse those types of views are associated with increased personal distress, so it affects our mental health adversely, as well as distressed couple relationships. Since I'm a couples person, that means a lot to me, that it's not just our individual well-being, but it impacts how we deal with our families and those kinds of things. And I've had the privilege of working with senior colleagues such as Nancy Boyd Franklin and other psychologists and things like that, where, as Bev discussed, we are also therapists. And so we've done a lot in our own work, and we've written in some of our clinical work, because I have those empirical publications you're supposed to have, and also publications regarding the clinical work that I've done. And we stress how important it is to, as a treatment goal, to externalize the problem. So there's this whole thing about, well, was that really a racial stressor? Did that person really mistreat me or discriminate against me, or was it in my head, was it me? Those kinds of self-doubts and things like that. And so we, some of the publications I have, encourage African Americans to externalize the problem and encourage therapists to accept that, hey, racism exists, and to maybe even label it and open it up as white therapists and Black therapists as well, to put that on the table, that maybe you've been a victim of racism. And to also not just say externalize it, but also help them to work on their coping skills. How do you deal with these things knowing that they exist? I also want to bring in another psychological concept of stereotype threat by Claude Steele. And he notes that stereotype threat is being at risk of confirming as a self-characteristic a negative stereotype about one's group. And a number of studies have shown that stereotype threat to be a robust phenomenon. So for example, there's this stereotype of intellectual inferiority of African Americans. So if African Americans are primed with that if they're thinking about being Black and the stigma that's associated with it before an intellectual performance event, their performance goes down. It's a decrease in their performance, which is different than if they're not primed with that. And so they also find with women, for example, math is a stigma of women, that we can't do math and things like that. So when they're primed with thinking about themselves as women before doing math, their performance decreases as compared with the times that they don't. So I find these things to be two important concepts, internalized stereotypes and anti-Black attitudes, as well as the stereotype threat, which is aside from what we think about ourselves, but just that concern that we're going to confirm somebody else's stereotype. And so when I think about my own work, I feel like I'm blessed. I came and I was invited to Rutgers. I had multiple offers. I had the GREs, SATs, all of the check mark kinds of things, the publications before I became a professor, et cetera. And one thing that I think is important to do is to check the academic climate of the environment you want to go to. And I thought Rutgers, I'm at Rutgers, was a great environment because I had a letter from Nancy Boyd Franklin, one of my mentors, and from 2 other women mentors saying how they would mentor me if I came to Rutgers. And I've talked with other people, and I'm blessed because that's a unique thing. But even with that, the reason why I start off with that is because the track to getting tenure is a tough one. And it was really the first time that I thought that stereotype threat probably applied to me and thinking about stigma in relationship to myself. And it was really a mind-blowing experience, if you will. So, for example, I was the only academic in my unit who was untenured and not yet established, as well as being at least 10 or 15 years younger than everybody else. I saw Black friends and colleagues who were unable to attain tenure while I was trying to get tenure. And so clearly you can see the role of some of those things like stereotype threat in my own life. It makes you think about things. And I like that Dr. Trotman talked about this imposter phenomenon. And the interesting thing is that's a normal phenomenon. Any new professor experiences him or herself as an imposter. But you can see how it can take on racial overtones when you're the only person there and other people are doing different kinds of things. So I came there as a young Black female, and my first term I was ABD, because which is all but dissertation, because I came straight from graduate school to Rutgers. And I had a lot of teaching woes from that I felt like they had different expectations of me, the students that I taught with. And there's this whole thing that my colleagues mentioned, that difference equals deviance quite often, especially in clinical psychology, because we study pathology, so we're always looking for problems. And so if you're not like me, you must be deviant. So in my child psychopathology class, I have to really start off with what's normal, what's pathological across cultures, and let's have that talk and deal with those things. And even in my diversity class, I kind of have found that the white students, it's easier for them to kind of locate some minority status within themselves, such as being women, gay or lesbian, or low socioeconomic status, to make that bridge to understanding what it's like for others. So it's been very interesting. And in research, I've had experiences, which someone else mentioned, of can you get a white control group, because I study Black couples. Also double the work in terms of who you know for both my own group, who I want to get to know and want to join those groups, and because they're supportive and they care about me, but I also have to go to these other institutions and these other conferences, et cetera, that my colleagues respect to get those letters that you need for tenure and those kinds of things. So it's like I have to have expertise in 2 groups and 2 bodies of literature. And I've had some challenges in terms of that research in emerging areas basically are less fundable, and some people have talked about that. Even in the subject pools, I did a study where I couldn't get very many, focus group study, and I never did get enough Black men to participate in the focus groups at Rutgers University. Also, non-traditional research methodologies being studied. Basically, there aren't many measures about us, and so I was never interested in measurement. But I found in trying to study Black couples and racial issues that I had to actually develop measures and do measurement development to be able to study the things that I was interested in. But I did have successes because I had senior colleagues who mentored me in terms of grant writing. I got what's called a minority supplement, so it's like a grant for an ethnic minority investigator that's tied to a senior person's larger grant. There are also co-investigator opportunities that people can have, and mechanisms such as that. So to conclude, basically, I think there's 2 ways that I would advocate to help persons like me in terms of those who have tenure or on their way to tenure. And I've had tenure for the last 4 years, thank God, right? But institutional support, I think one thing that really helped me being at Rutgers is that the mission statement of my program and the practices that they had valued diversity. And I think those are the kinds of things that can counteract stereotype threat. When the students come to our program on admissions interview day, the dean says, hey, we value diversity here, and if you're not interested in that, don't come to Rutgers, don't come to Gazette. So those kinds of things, and they actually pay for us to have different events, et cetera, celebrating diversity. Those kinds of things matter. And I think in terms of for black women in ways that they can support themselves in the tenure track is to assess the university climate before you come. A lot of my friends who did not get tenure did not have nearly the supportive environment that I had and that I made sure I had. So while I certainly applaud my senior colleagues such as Dr. Trotman, I was so impressed with all the firsts that Bev Green talked about. I never wanted to be one, and these are the kinds of decisions you have to make in terms of being the only person somewhere. I wanted to have at least one other, and it was only one other black faculty member there, so I wouldn't be alone. And you also have to have networks in the group and out of the group as well. So I appreciate things like Deb Gray-White. She has an annual Black Women Faculty Potluck. So I've met some people here before with that, and that's very important. Also, I'm a Delta, so I've seen some sorors here, things like that. So you have to find things that really nurture you in your professional life and outside of that. And then you also should, those things help, I think, in rooting out and challenging negative stereotype threats or in-group views, because with all of the negativity out there about us, sometimes it's really hard. You have to make sure you're not taking those things in. So thanks a lot.